The moving truck pulled away from our new driveway, leaving behind the last of our boxes. After 15 years with the Bureau, I had finally secured a transfer to a field office closer to home. This move represented everything I wanted for Emma and me: stability, community, and a fresh start away from the chaos my job often brought into our lives. Emma was 14 now, and the older she got, the more I realized how precious our time together was. Emma had been deaf since birth. Her mother had passed away when she was just 4, making me both mother and father to a child with needs I was constantly learning to meet. The Bureau had been understanding, but field work and single parenthood never mixed well. This suburban paradise of Oak Ridge Estates, with its excellent school district and programs for deaf students, seemed like the answer to prayers I had stopped praying years ago. Emma stood beside me on our new front lawn, her hands moving excitedly as she signed about her plans for the garden. I smiled, signing back that we would make it beautiful together. The spring sunlight caught in her chestnut hair, so like her mother's, and I felt a moment of peace I had not experienced in years. Her eyes, always expressive, conveyed what her voice never could: pure joy at our new beginning. The neighborhood itself was picture perfect. Matching colonial homes with manicured lawns lined the streets. Children rode bikes along the sidewalks, and neighbors waved as they collected their mail. It was exactly the normal, stable environment I had wanted for Emma. I had deliberately chosen a career fighting the worst elements of society so that others could enjoy this kind of peaceful existence. Now, it was our turn. I was arranging boxes in the garage when a shadow fell across the concrete floor. A woman stood in the driveway, clipboard clutched against her chest, smile firmly fixed on her face. Her blonde hair was styled in the kind of precision bob that suggested frequent salon visits, and her clothing appeared expensive yet conservative. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I am Diane Keller, president of the Homeowner Association. We are so pleased to have new neighbors." I wiped my hand on my jeans before shaking hers. "Thank you, Robert Winters. My daughter Emma and I are happy to be here." Her eyes flicked to the boxes, then to the blue mailbox we had brought from our previous home, a gift from Emma's mother. Something in her gaze lingered too long, though her smile never faltered. "I just wanted to introduce myself and drop off our welcome packet. It contains all the HOA regulations, quite important to review as soon as possible." She handed me a thick binder. "We pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards here in Oak Ridge. It makes all our properties more valuable." Her tone was pleasant but left no room for disagreement. Emma appeared beside me, and I introduced her using both voice and sign language. Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How nice," she said, not looking at Emma but rather through her. "Well, I will let you get back to unpacking. Do not hesitate to call if you have questions about the regulations. We have monthly meetings you will be expected to attend." As she walked away, her heels clicking precisely on the concrete, I felt a familiar sensation, the same one I experienced when interviewing subjects who were not being entirely forthcoming. Something about Diane Keller set off my professional instincts, a silent alarm honed through years of interrogations and investigations. But I pushed the feeling aside. We were civilians here, neighbors. This was not an operation or a case to solve. Emma tugged my sleeve, her hands moving quickly. "I do not like her. Her smile is fake." I had learned long ago never to underestimate my daughter's ability to read people. When one sense diminishes, others often sharpen. Emma could perceive insincerity in facial expressions and body language that even my trained eye sometimes missed. "Let us give her a chance," I signed back. "New beginnings, remember." Emma nodded, but the excitement in her eyes had dimmed. As we returned to unpacking, The thick binder of HOA regulations sat unopened on the counter, casting a longer shadow than its size suggested. The first violation notice appeared 3 days after we moved in. A white envelope slipped under our front door contained a form letter citing non-regulation mailbox color and requesting immediate compliance with HOA standards. The blue mailbox, a cherished memory of Emma's mother, apparently violated Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines requiring all external fixtures to be neutral-toned and uniform in appearance. I studied the citation, noting the familiar signature of Diane Keller at the bottom. While part of me recognized the pettiness of the complaint, my years at the Bureau had taught me to choose my battles carefully. I explain the situation to Emma that evening, watching her face fall as I gently suggested we repaint the mailbox. "But Mom gave it to us," she signed, her fingers moving sharply with emotion. "Why do they get to decide everything?" I sighed, setting aside the spaghetti I was preparing for dinner. "Sometimes living in a community means compromising," I signed back. "We can keep the mailbox, just change its color. The important memories are inside us, not in the paint." Emma reluctantly agreed, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. That weekend, we repainted the mailbox a suitable Oak Ridge tan that matched the 43 other mailboxes on our street. I filled out the compliance form and submitted it as requested, hoping that would be the end of our HOA interactions. It was not. 2 weeks later, another notice appeared, this time regarding the garden gnome Emma had placed in our fledgling front garden. Decorative items exceeding 12 inches in height are prohibited in front-facing landscapes. The following week, it was the wind chimes Emma had hung from our porch. Auditory disturbances are not permitted in common areas. The irony of that particular complaint was not lost on either of us. "It is not like I can hear them anyway," Emma signed with teenage sarcasm that made me smile despite my frustration. Despite these annoyances, Emma's enthusiasm for our new home remained strong. She had taken particular interest in developing the backyard garden, researching plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. We spent evenings there together, a small concrete patio becoming our sign language practice space, where she taught me new signs she learned at school, and I shared stories from my day, carefully edited versions that excluded the darker aspects of FBI work. The real trouble began when we installed special accommodations for Emma's safety. The standard doorbell was useless for her when she was home alone, so we installed a system that flashed lights throughout the house when someone was at the door. Additionally, I had special safety lights installed that would flash in case of fire alarm activation. These modifications were not only practical but necessary for Emma's well-being and independence. The day after installation, Diane Keller appeared at our door unannounced. Her clipboard seemed permanently attached to her person, and her smile looked more strained than ever. "Mr. Winters," she began without preamble, "we have received complaints about unauthorized external modifications to your property." I maintained a neutral expression, the same one I used during difficult interrogations. "These are necessary safety accommodations for my daughter. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides protection for such modifications." Diane's smile did not waver, but her eyes hardened. "Oak Ridge Estates certainly supports accessibility. However, there are proper channels for requesting exceptions to our community standards. External light fixtures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which meets quarterly. My daughter needs these accommodations now, not in 3 months," I explained calmly, drawing on crisis negotiation techniques I had learned at Quantico. "Perhaps we could discuss a provisional approval." "Everyone wants exceptions, Mr. Winters," she interrupted, her tone condescending. But rules are rules. Have you considered a facility better equipped for people with special needs? The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Emma, who had been watching our conversation from the hallway, caught enough of Diane's dismissive hand gesture to understand she was being discussed. The hurt that flashed across her face ignited something primal within me, a protective instinct that transcended my professional training. "These modifications stay," I stated firmly, no longer bothering with diplomatic tones. "If you have concerns, I suggest you consult with your HOA attorney about ADA compliance laws. I believe you will find your position legally untenable." Diane's lips thinned to a tight line. "We will see about that, Mr. Winters. Oak Ridge has maintained its standards for 20 years. I suggest you review your contractual obligations before making threats." As she turned to leave, Emma stepped fully into view, deliberately making eye contact with Diane. My daughter signed something quickly, a phrase I pretended not to understand but recognized immediately as definitely not taught in her school classes. When Diane was gone, I raised an eyebrow at Emma. "Where did you learn that sign?" "Internet," she signed back with a mischievous smile. Was I wrong? I should have corrected her but found myself smiling instead. "No, technically accurate assessment." That night, I reviewed the HOA regulations more carefully, identifying multiple provisions that contradicted federal accessibility laws. My FBI training included extensive knowledge of civil rights protections, knowledge that might prove necessary sooner than I had anticipated, but I hoped the situation would not escalate further. I wanted peace for Emma, not conflict. Little did I know that our HOA troubles were just beginning, and that Diane Keller's animosity toward my daughter would soon manifest in ways I could never have imagined. The annual Spring Garden Showcase was the highlight of the Oak Ridge social calendar according to the community newsletter. Residents displayed their gardening achievements, competed for trivial awards, and socialized in the central community park. Under normal circumstances, I would have avoided such forced conviviality, but Emma had spent weeks preparing for this event with unexpected enthusiasm. Her garden patch had flourished under her careful attention. The butterfly bushes were beginning to bloom, and the carefully arranged stone path she had created led to a small bench where she often sat reading. Most impressive were the hand-painted wooden signs she had created, each describing a different plant with both text and the corresponding sign language gesture illustrated below. It was her way of sharing her world with hearing neighbors, a bridge between different modes of communication. "Do you think people will understand them?" She signed nervously that morning as we prepared to transport her display materials to the community park. "They are beautiful," I signed back truthfully. "And if they do not understand, you can teach them. That is the point of communication." Her smile brightened the entire kitchen. These moments, watching her confidence grow, made everything worthwhile. I had faced down armed criminals with less anxiety than Emma felt about this garden showcase, but her courage in constantly navigating a world not designed for her never ceased to amaze me. The community park buzzed with activity when we arrived. Tables lined the perimeter, each displaying photographs, potted arrangements, or gardening implements. Neighbors I recognized but had barely spoken to nodded as we set up Emma's display on our assigned table. Her illustrated signs attracted immediate attention, particularly from several mothers with young children who seemed genuinely interested in learning the signs for different flowers. I stepped back, allowing Emma her moment. A familiar sense of vigilance kept me scanning the crowd, an occupational habit I could never fully suppress. That is when I spotted Diane Keller moving through the gathering like visiting royalty. Her clipboard remained firmly in hand as she evaluated each display, making notes and offering what appeared to be critiques rather than compliments. As the event progressed, I noticed Diane deliberately avoiding our table, though her gaze occasionally darted toward Emma with an expression I recognized all too well: contempt, barely concealed beneath civility. It was the same look I had seen on the faces of suspects who believed themselves superior to those they victimized. The confrontation occurred approximately 2 hours into the event. I had stepped away briefly to retrieve water bottles from our car. The temperature had climbed into the high 80s, and despite the shaded pavilion, the heat was becoming uncomfortable. When I returned, I immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere near our display. Diane Keller stood directly behind Emma, who was arranging her photograph collection for a young couple interested in her butterfly garden. Emma, unable to hear Diane approaching, remained focused on her task. Diane's face had reddened, her mouth moving rapidly as she apparently addressed my daughter. The couple looked uncomfortable, glancing between Diane and Emma with growing concern. I quickened my pace, instinctively assessing the situation as I had done countless times in the field. Diane held a large coffee cup, gesturing emphatically with her free hand. Emma, finally sensing someone behind her, turned with her customary polite smile and offered Diane one of her brochures, a piece offering in the universal language of goodwill. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Diane's expression contorted from irritation to rage. "I said move," she shouted, loud enough that I could hear it clearly from 20 feet away. Then, with deliberate malice that would haunt my nightmares for months afterward, she threw the contents of her coffee cup directly into Emma's face. The scalding liquid splashed across my daughter's cheeks, forehead, and eyes. Steam actually rose from her skin as she stumbled backward, knocking over her display. The most devastating aspect was the absence of a scream, Emma's silent suffering somehow more heart-wrenching than any audible cry would have been. Her hands flew to her face, her mouth open in a voiceless expression of agony. I was at her side in seconds, professional training overriding the parental panic threatening to overwhelm me. "Water!" I shouted to the stunned onlookers. "Cold. Water now." Someone thrust a water bottle into my hands, and I immediately began flushing Emma's face, particularly her eyes, checking for signs of serious damage. Around us, the community had frozen in collective shock. Several people had phones out, recording the aftermath if not the incident itself. Diane stood unmoving, coffee cup still extended, a strange expression of satisfaction quickly morphing to concern as she seemed to register the dozens of witnesses. "She would not move when I told her to," Diane stated loudly, attempting to control the narrative. "I tripped. It was an accident." But the calculated nature of her action had been too obvious. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the gathering crowd. A woman I recognized as a nurse from down the street knelt beside us, examining Emma's increasingly blistered skin. "She needs medical attention immediately," she advised. "First and possibly second-degree burns. Her eyes need to be examined by a professional." I nodded, gathering Emma into my arms as she trembled from shock and pain. The protective rage building inside me was unlike anything I had experienced in 15 years of law enforcement. Every instinct demanded immediate retribution, but Emma needed me calm and focused. "Someone call 911, I instructed, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. Years of crisis management had prepared me for maintaining exterior composure while internally processing trauma. As neighbors cleared a path for us, I heard Diane speaking rapidly to members of the HOA board who had gathered around her. It was not intentional. The deaf girl was blocking the walkway. I asked her repeatedly to move. I locked eyes with Diane over the heads of concerned neighbors. In that moment, I allowed a glimpse of my professional self to surface, the calculating federal agent who had stared down killers and terrorists. Something in my expression must have registered because Diane's stream of excuses faltered, and for the first time, uncertainty flashed across her face. "This is not over," I stated simply, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Then I turned my attention back to Emma, signing one-handed that everything would be okay, that I would not leave her side, that we would get through this together. As we waited for the ambulance, I mentally cataloged every witness, every potential camera angle, every procedural step that would need to be followed. The agent in me was already building a case, while the father in me held my injured child, promising protection she could not hear but could feel in the steadiness of my embrace. The emergency room buzzed with fluorescent efficiency. Emma lay on a treatment bed, her face covered with cooling gel as medical professionals assessed the damage. First-degree burns covered most of her cheeks and forehead, with several patches of second-degree burns near her right eye where the coffee had been hottest. The doctor had assured me that her eyesight would not be permanently affected, but the risk of scarring remained significant. I stood at her bedside, signing updates and reassurances while maintaining what my colleagues at the Bureau called my mission face, the calm, focused expression that betrayed none of the emotional turmoil beneath. Emma needed stability now, not the rage that continued to build with each passing hour. "It hurts," she signed weakly, her hands trembling slightly from pain medication. "I know, sweetheart," I signed back. "The doctor says the medicine will help soon. Try to rest." While Emma drifted into medicated sleep, I stepped into the hallway and activated the part of my brain that had made me effective at the FBI. I placed calls to 3 neighbors who had witnessed the incident, requesting they email me any photos or videos they had captured. I contacted the local police department, ensuring an officer would meet us at the hospital to take formal statements. I documented every medical assessment, every treatment administered, every comment made by healthcare providers regarding the nature and severity of Emma's injuries. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from neighbors expressing shock and support. Among them was a text from the HOA secretary, Gerald Tompkins. "The board wishes to express regret for the unfortunate incident at today's event. We hope your daughter recovers quickly." The deliberately passive language, the absence of accountability, the failure to even name Diane or acknowledge the deliberate nature of her actions. It was organizational damage control at its most transparent. I had seen it countless times in my career when institutions circled wagons around their own. By evening, Emma was cleared for discharge with prescriptions for pain management and specialized burn cream. Her face was partially bandaged, the white gauze stark against her skin. The attending physician provided detailed care instructions, emphasizing the importance of keeping the burns clean to minimize scarring. "Teenagers are resilient," she assured me, her kind eyes meeting mine. "But this kind of trauma can leave emotional scars too. I have included a referral to a counselor who specializes in working with deaf adolescents." I thanked her, adding the referral to my growing case file, because that is what this had become in my mind, a case to be methodically documented and pursued. The drive home was silent beyond the usual. Emma stared out the passenger window, her hands still in her lap. When we arrived, our neighbor Mrs. Chen was waiting with a homemade dinner and gentle sympathy that required no sign language to communicate. I thanked her, grateful for this small kindness amidst the day's horror. After settling Emma into bed with her medication, I sat beside her, waiting until she was ready to communicate. "Did I do something wrong?" She finally signed, her movements hesitant, eyes searching my face for truth. The question shattered something inside me. "No," I signed emphatically. "Nothing. She did something wrong, something terrible and cruel. This was not your fault." "The other kids at school say the HOA is important," she continued. "That Mrs. Keller makes the rules everyone must follow. Will we have to move away now?" "No," I signed, conviction making my movements sharp and clear. "We are not going anywhere. This is our home." After Emma finally fell asleep, I descended the stairs to our kitchen and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the badge I had placed on the table, the FBI credentials I kept secured when not on duty. 15 years of specialized training, connections throughout federal law enforcement, expertise in building cases against those who believed themselves beyond accountability. All of it had seemed separate from my life as Emma's father. Until now. I created a secure folder on my hard drive labeled Oak Ridge Incident. Into it, I placed the photographs from the hospital, the videos 3 neighbors had already forwarded, scanned copies of the medical reports, and a detailed timeline of events beginning with our first encounter with Diane Keller. This was no longer about HOA regulations or neighborhood politics. This was assault on a disabled minor, my child committed with malice, and followed by coordinated attempts to minimize and mischaracterize. Diane Keller had no idea who she had attacked my daughter in front of. She had no idea that in me, she had created not just an enemy, but an expert in the systematic dismantling of individuals who abused power. "She picked the wrong parent to mess with," I whispered to the empty kitchen, the words both promise and threat. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, planning my next moves with the strategic patience that had broken organized crime rings and corruption schemes. Diane Keller believed herself untouchable in her little kingdom of rules and regulations. She was about to discover how mistaken she was. Morning arrived with renewed purpose. After checking on Emma, who slept fitfully due to pain, I made coffee and began implementing the response plan I had developed during the night. I approached this situation exactly as I would a high-priority bureau investigation, methodically, comprehensively, and with unwavering focus. First, I ran a comprehensive background check on Diane Keller using databases I had legitimate access to through my position. The results painted an illuminating picture. Diane had served on 3 different HOA boards over the past decade, each tenure ending abruptly without explanation. Her social media accounts, while carefully curated, contained thinly veiled discriminatory comments about certain elements changing neighborhood character. She had attended community college courses in accounting, but never completed certification, despite claiming financial expertise in her HOA campaign materials. Most interestingly, she had been named in 2 civil complaints regarding discriminatory enforcement of community guidelines, both settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. The pattern was clear. This was not an isolated incident but consistent behavior from someone who weaponized rules against those she deemed undesirable. By mid-morning, I had created a secure digital evidence board, the same system I used for complex federal cases. It allowed me to connect seemingly disparate information into a comprehensive narrative. The assault on Emma served as the central node, but tentacles extended outward to financial discrepancies in HOA records, selective enforcement of regulations, and potential violations of fair housing laws. I placed a carefully worded call to Martin Suarez, a fellow agent who specialized in financial crimes. Without revealing personal stakes, I discussed a theoretical situation involving HOA financial management. Martin provided valuable insight about common fraud patterns in community associations, the misappropriation of funds for personal expenses, inflated contracts awarded to friends or family, special assessment funds diverted from their intended purposes. Homeowner associations collect thousands of dollars with minimal oversight, Martin explained. Perfect setup for skimming if someone is so inclined. Financial records are technically available to members but often buried in deliberately confusing accounting. I thanked him and added financial investigation to my growing action list. The HOA regulations stated that any member could request financial documentation from the past 3 years. I drafted the formal request immediately, ensuring it cited the exact bylaw provisions requiring compliance. While Emma rested, I received visits from several neighbors offering support and additional evidence. Patricia Wung, who lived 3 doors down, provided security camera footage from her driveway that had captured the entire garden showcase, including the assault. Michael Green, a retired attorney, offered his expertise in disability law and HOA regulations. Most surprisingly, Gerald Tompkins, the HOA secretary who had sent the noncommittal text, appeared at my door looking nervous. "What happened to your daughter was inexcusable," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Diane to materialize behind him. "Diane has controlled this neighborhood through intimidation for years. Most of us are too afraid of targeted harassment to speak up, but this goes beyond petty rule enforcement. I have documentation you might find interesting." He handed me a USB drive containing 3 years of HOA financial records showing questionable expenditures, selectively enforced fines, and patterns of harassment against residents who challenged Diane's authority. This was the break I needed: credible internal documentation from a board member willing to testify if necessary. That evening, as I changed Emma's bandages, I noticed her watching me with unusual intensity. When I finished, she signed slowly, deliberately. "What are you doing about her?" I considered deflecting the question, protecting her from the complexities of my investigation, but Emma deserved honesty. I had always treated her with the respect of forthright communication. "I am building a case," I signed, "gathering evidence about what happened and other things Mrs. Keller has done wrong." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Like your work cases?" "Yes," I acknowledged, "very much like that." She was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a bandage. "Are you seeking revenge?" she finally asked, her signs precise and serious. The question gave me pause. In the focused intensity of my investigation, I had not fully examined my motivations. Was this about justice or vengeance? The lines sometimes blurred even for seasoned agents. "No," I signed after careful consideration. "We are not seeking revenge. We are seeking accountability. There is a difference." Emma processed this, then added her own perspective. "So others do not get hurt like me." Her wisdom, so beyond her 14 years, strengthened my resolve. This was not merely about one incident or personal retribution. It was about addressing systematic abuse of power that threatened the most vulnerable in our community. Emma had transformed our personal trauma into a principled stand. We developed a new sign together that evening, fingers forming both justice and peace simultaneously, a visual representation of our shared goal. As her burns began to heal, I noticed her spirit recovering its resilience as well. She had always been my strength, even when I thought I was being strong for her. By the end of the week, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Diane Keller and the Oak Ridge HOA's pattern of discriminatory practices, financial irregularities, and civil rights violations. 3 other families with disabled members had come forward with accounts of accommodation requests denied or unnecessarily delayed. Gerald Tompkins provided internal emails showing Diane specifically targeting certain homeowners for heightened scrutiny while ignoring violations by her allies. The evidence was damning, multi-layered, and meticulously organized. Exactly the kind of case that had earned me commendations at the Bureau. What had begun as a parent's outrage had evolved into something more significant, a systematic exposure of corruption that affected dozens of families. The next step would require bringing this evidence into the public sphere in a controlled, strategic manner. I contacted the HOA board secretary and requested an emergency meeting to address serious concerns regarding recent events and organizational governance. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. As I prepared my presentation, I knew this confrontation would be different from my professional operations. This was personal in a way no case had ever been, but the principles remained the same: thorough preparation, strategic presentation of evidence, and unwavering commitment to justice. Diane Keller had built her power on intimidation and the assumption that no one would challenge her authority. She was about to discover how catastrophically she had miscalculated. The community center meeting room filled quickly Tuesday evening. Word had spread about the emergency session, drawing a larger crowd than typical HOA meetings. Residents who rarely participated in community governance arrived early, securing seats along the walls when the chairs filled. The energy in the room reminded me of courtrooms before high-profile testimonies, anticipation mixed with tension. Emma had insisted on attending despite my concerns. "It is my face, my story," she signed with the determination that both frustrated and impressed me. I should be there. I could not argue with her logic, though I positioned us near the back exit in case the situation became too intense. The HOA board sat at a long table facing the audience. Diane occupied the center chair, flanked by 4 board members including Gerald Tompkins, who avoided eye contact with me. Diane maintained her composed facade, though I noted subtle stress indicators, her fingers repeatedly straightening already aligned papers, the slight tightness around her mouth. "This emergency session of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association will come to order," she announced with practiced authority. "We have several items on the agenda, beginning with the treasurer's report." "Point of order," I stated, rising from my seat. Heads turned throughout the room. This meeting was called specifically to address the assault that occurred at the garden showcase and related concerns about HOA governance. That should be the first agenda item. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Diane's smile remained fixed, though her knuckles whitened around her pen. "Mr. Winters," she replied smoothly, "while we understand your concern, there are procedural matters that must be addressed first. The incident you reference will be covered under new business." "The incident I reference," I countered, keeping my tone measured, "was the assault on my disabled daughter by you, Mrs. Keller. And according to HOA Bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 7, any member may call for immediate consideration of an agenda item with the support of 10 other members." Hands rose throughout the room, far exceeding the required number. Diane's facade cracked slightly as she glanced at the HOA attorney seated in the corner, who nodded reluctantly. "Very well," she conceded. "You have the floor for 5 minutes." I moved to the front of the room, carrying a leather portfolio and a USB drive. "I will need the projector, please," I stated, not a request but a directive. Gerald hurried to set up the equipment, his nervous energy palpable. As the screen illuminated, I turned to face the community I had joined just months ago. Emma sat straight-backed in her chair, her healing burns still visible despite her attempts to cover them with makeup. Her courage centered me. 3 weeks ago, I began, my daughter Emma was assaulted at a community event by our HOA president. Scalding coffee was deliberately thrown in her face after she failed to hear commands to move aside. Emma is deaf, a fact known to the board and specifically to Mrs. Keller. The first slide appeared a medical photograph showing Emma's burns immediately after treatment. Several audience members gasped. I continued methodically, presenting witness statements, security footage from Patricia Wang's camera, and medical documentation. This assault was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior, I continued, transitioning to financial documentation. Over the past 3 years, HOA funds have been mismanaged in violation of both association bylaws and state regulations. Slide after slide demonstrated financial discrepancies. Inflated landscaping contracts awarded to Diane's brother-in-law's company. Selective enforcement of fines generating thousands in revenue diverted to unnecessarily elaborate board retreats. Accommodation requests from disabled residents systematically delayed or denied. Diane interrupted repeatedly, her voice rising with each attempt. This is character assassination. These allegations are baseless and potentially libelous. I continued as if she had not spoken, years of courtroom testimony having taught me the power of unflappable presentation. The evidence spoke for itself, clear, documented, and damning. As I reached the conclusion of my presentation, I finally addressed Diane directly. You have used your position to intimidate, discriminate, and personally profit. You have selectively enforced rules against those you dislike while ignoring violations by your friends. And most seriously, you physically assaulted my daughter when she did not comply quickly enough with your demands. I placed M.Y. FBI badge on the podium, its gold gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The room fell completely silent. As both a parent and a federal agent specializing in financial crimes and civil rights violations, I cannot ignore what has happened here. This badge represents my professional obligation to uphold the law, but more importantly, my personal commitment to protect the vulnerable from those who abuse power. Diane's face drained of color as implications set in. She lunged toward the microphone, voice shrill with panic. This is intimidation. He is threatening me because I enforce the rules. He cannot use his government position against private citizens. Her outburst accomplished what my evidence alone might not have, revealing the person behind the polished facade. Board members physically distanced themselves from her, sliding their chairs away as if her behavior might be contagious. Then something unexpected happened. Neighbors began to stand, one by one, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and selective enforcement. Mr. Abernathy described being fined for religious decorations, while others were permitted extensive holiday displays. The Rodriguezes detailed how their accessibility ramp request was denied, while similar structures were approved for board members' parents. Mrs. Chen recounted how her traditional garden sculptures were deemed culturally inappropriate, while European statuary was permitted. Each testimony built upon the previous, creating a comprehensive picture of systemic discrimination disguised as rule enforcement. I stepped back from the podium, no longer needing to drive the narrative. The community had found its voice. I returned to Emma's side, signing key points as neighbors continued to speak. She watched intently, occasionally nodding as experiences resonated with our own. What happens now? She signed as the testimonies continued. Justice, I signed back, slow but certain. The emergency meeting extended 2 hours beyond its scheduled end. By its conclusion, the board had voted to suspend Diane pending investigation, establish an ethics committee with diverse representation, and hire an independent auditor to review financial records. The community had awakened to its own power, and the HOA would never be the same. As we left the community center, neighbors approached Emma directly rather than speaking through me as they often had before. Some attempted basic signs they had looked up, others simply made eye contact and smiled genuinely. The barrier that had subtly existed between my daughter and the community was beginning to dissolve. I watched Diane being escorted to her car by the HOA attorney, her previously perfect posture now collapsed inward. She had lost more than her position tonight. She had lost the carefully constructed illusion of authority she had wielded like a weapon. As she caught my eye across the parking lot, I did not see fear or anger in her expression, but something more profound: recognition. She finally understood who she had challenged and what she had unleashed. Not just a federal agent, but a parent who would move mountains to protect their child. The confrontation had been necessary, but I felt no triumph in her downfall. Justice was never about destruction but restoration, a principle I had maintained throughout my FBI career. The real work of healing, both for Emma and our community, was just beginning. The legal consequences for Diane Keller unfolded methodically over the following months. Criminal charges for assault were filed based on witness testimony and video evidence. The district attorney, reviewing the case personally due to its sensitive nature, added additional charges related to bias against a person with disability. The civil suit our attorney filed addressed both physical damages and emotional distress, eventually resulting in a settlement that would fund Emma's college education. More significant than the legal proceedings were the changes within Oak Ridge Estates. The interim HOA board, led by Gerald Tompkins, who had found his courage, implemented comprehensive reforms. Financial transparency became paramount, with monthly statements made available to all residents. The Architectural Review Committee was restructured to include a disability advocate who reviewed all decisions for accessibility compliance. Rules were simplified, reducing the original 100-page handbook to 20 pages of clear, reasonable guidelines. Emma's recovery progressed steadily. The burn specialist had been right: teenagers are resilient. The physical scars faded more quickly than expected, though certain angles of sunlight still highlighted the damaged skin on her right cheek. The emotional healing took longer, with weekly sessions with the counselor helping her process feelings of vulnerability and fear that sometimes surfaced in nightmares. Throughout her recovery, Emma displayed remarkable compassion. When the counselor asked what she wanted to happen to Diane, Emma signed thoughtfully, "I want her to learn, not just suffer." Her wisdom continually humbled me. The garden Emma had worked so hard on became a symbol of her resilience. What had been damaged during the assault was replanted with contributions from neighbors, cuttings from their own gardens, decorative stones, even a small fountain installed by Mr. Chen, whose wife had brought us dinner that first terrible night. 3 months after the incident, Emma suggested a community garden day to thank everyone for their support. The event was nothing like the formal garden showcase that had ended so disastrously. Instead, neighbors gathered informally in our backyard, sharing plants and gardening tips. Several parents had been learning sign language alongside their children, creating moments of genuine connection as Emma patiently corrected their technique. I observed from the patio, witnessing the community I had hoped for when we first moved to Oak Ridge. My FBI colleague Martin dropped by, ostensibly to deliver case documents, but really to see how we were doing. "You know," he commented quietly, "in 15 years of friendship I have never seen you look so settled." I considered his observation. Protecting strangers was important work, I replied. But this, protecting my daughter, helping build something better from something broken, this feels like what I was meant to do. The anniversary of the incident arrived with spring blossoms. The new HOA board, now permanently established with term limits and ethical guidelines, approved Emma's proposal for a community garden in the Central Park dedicated to accessibility and inclusion. The garden featured plants with interesting textures for the visually impaired, wide paths for wheelchair users, and educational signs that included Braille and sign language illustrations, expanded versions of Emma's original designs. At the garden dedication, Emma gave a tour using sign language while I translated. Her confidence had returned fully, perhaps stronger than before. When a new neighbor asked about the unusual flowers in one section, Emma smiled and signed her response. "These grow stronger after being burned," I translated, my voice catching slightly. "The heat activates something in them that makes their roots push deeper." That evening, as dusk settled over our neighborhood, Emma and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin their nightly display. The HOA had once cited such swings as violations, but those days were long past. "Are you still angry at her?" Emma signed suddenly. I did not pretend to misunderstand. The question deserved honest reflection. "No," I finally signed. "Anger burns too much energy. I am proud of what we built instead." Emma nodded, leaning against my shoulder as darkness fell. Later, I placed my FBI badge in its drawer, where it remained when I was not on duty. It would always be part of my identity, but it no longer defined my relationship with this community. What mattered more was being a parent who stood up when necessary and a neighbor who had helped transform a neighborhood. True justice, I had learned, was not found in punishment alone, but in the healing that followed, in a community that emerged stronger from adversity, in a daughter who had turned trauma into purpose, and in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victory was simply creating a home where everyone belonged.